There is nothing wrong with your streaming device. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. For the next, however long this video is, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. Or do whatever. I'm a YouTube video, not a cop.
I love what the internet has enabled us to do. Obviously, we've had websites forever, but now it's really easy to share things, and it's easy to create things and share those created things with other people. And also things like streaming and online video are way more accessible than they've ever been, especially with things like cameras being accessible to everyone pretty much all the time. Despite all of these newer technologies and developments, I think one thing that's really interesting is actually an older development, and that is podcasting. It's not really that much older, especially when we're talking about the age of the internet, but it's older in the same way that, streaming or online video, or rather live video, is closer to television, and podcasting is a lot more similar to, say, radio. To be completely honest though, neither of them are all that similar to their predecessors. For starters, you can broadcast pretty much whatever you want on stream or as a podcast, whereas television and radio are obviously very highly regulated. I find it interesting because of the feel of a podcast as compared to something like a YouTube video. Like other forms of broadcasting, a podcast can feel like you're talking to an audience, so a bunch of people in a crowd, something like that. But, and maybe this is the kinds of YouTube videos that I've watched, unlike YouTube or online video, podcasts can kind of reach you in a way that feels more personal. It's possible, although also not super common, that the podcast you're listening to can feel as though you are just there with another person, or you're part of a small room with a bunch of other people, as compared to something like this. Part of that might have to do with how the content is delivered. Podcasts are more or less what I would call federated. There's a whole bunch of people producing podcasts, and those podcasts are all hosted in different platforms. You probably find a podcast on something like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. By comparison, YouTube or online video is basically syndicated, is all located on one single solitary platform. The way that you experience that is the exact same regardless of content that you're consuming. If you're watching my YouTube video, if you're watching somebody else's YouTube video, it's the same platform, it all looks the same. You expect there to be comments, whereas for a podcast, you don't expect that. Is that a good thing? I don't know. But let's move away from all this talk about broadcasting and talk a little bit more about the mediums themselves. I think one of the things that I find so endearing about podcasts is how much is done with so little. If you're just having a conversational sort of thing, an interview, something like that, you don't really need that much. You need a microphone or a microphone, whatever. You just need a way to hear the other people, and that's it. Whether you're telling a story, whether you're doing an interview, it's possible to tell something compelling with just that audio. You don't necessarily need sound effects or anything like that. You can get away with that. You can make something really impressive with not very much. With video, it's harder. It's just a lot harder to have that same level of engagement because the expectation is not just that you're listening, but also that you're watching. Maybe you're just listening, in which case that's fine. But if you're watching, there needs to be something that's engaging. That can be as simple as making sure that you have good lighting and making sure that you have different angles that you can watch an interview from. But if, as an example, you asked me to listen to somebody talk for an hour or watch them talk for an hour, I would probably get bored of the latter. I don't know if that's universally true, but it does kind of illustrate the idea that it's much harder to capture people's attention when you have this additional dimension to work with. But let's talk about more complex examples, like audio dramas, something that I'll come back to in just a second. In the case of an audio drama, you have different scenes, different characters, lots of different things going on. All of this is conveyed through the medium of audio.
If you're strong, I look strong.
If you're weak, I look weak.
Guess what camp you chumps fall into?
Oh God, we're so sorry.
Please don't kill us.
As a person producing this, you still have the same goal. You want to create a convincing world that the listener, that the audience can inhabit. The difference is, though, that when you're only working in the medium audio, it's a lot easier to sell that to a listener. What does a T-Rex sound like? Well, I don't know, but I can make a sound that convinces you that it's something dinosaur-like. If I have to convey that with video, then not only do I have to convince you with sound, for example, if you had like a T-Rex and it screeched like a cat, you'd be like, nah, that ain't right. You're not selling me on that. But you also have to convince them with visuals. Something has to look convincing. When CG animation was fairly novel, a lot of people would complain that things looked fake. And people still, to some extent, complain that things look fake. But I think that brings up the idea of like verisimilitude. What feels real to the audience? And what can you convince them feels real? And in audio, it's a lot more forgiving. You can fake a bunch of stuff and it works, with the caveat that there's a lot of things that are harder to convey through just audio. Good luck having a fight scene where you just have a bunch of sounds. Oh, he just narrowly dodged that. It's like, kitty. Not to mention that making any of this content takes a lot less time if you're doing just audio versus video as well. When I'm working on the Zeal archives, and if we're talking about just the discussion portion, which is pretty similar to what we're doing right now, when the audio is finished, and it's about, let's say 20 to 30 minutes, that takes me, say, 2 to 3 hours to edit. Doing one of these Vedas by comparison, the finished product is about 5 minutes, and it takes about the same time, which is, if you work it out to the that means, by my estimate, it takes about 4 times longer to produce a video than it does to produce audio. I imagine it would be different for the actual audio drama portion, but it gives a sense of how much more work video is compared to just audio. To be completely honest, I'm just really impressed with what people are able to make in both mediums. I have really enjoyed making these Vedas so far, but they are also so much more work than doing any of the podcasts that I've done. But also helps me to appreciate how much I can accomplish doing things like the audio drama in the same amount of time. Also, it really highlights the very different skill set that you need to work in one medium versus the other. And this is just talking about like live action, because if you were doing something like animation, there's an entirely different set of skills that you need. Oh, right, audio dramas, that was the other thing. I didn't actually mention this. What I find fascinating about podcasting as well is, you know, way back at the beginning of the age of radio, they had these things called radio plays, which were people performing a big scene like Captain America or something like that. They were doing these things live and on the air to an audience. And it's just fascinating that we have this old school idea from like, I'm gonna say the 40s and the 50s that people have brought into the present, and it still works. I don't know a lot about the history of radio plays, but I imagine it wasn't that it didn't work anymore, it's that the television kind of made it slightly more obsolete. And now in an age where media can come from anywhere, from content creators, from production studios and whatnot, it's kind of interesting to see the medium come back into play. I think what I'm trying to say is there's no way I could have made the Zeal archives as a video. These betas are getting really hard. But we've only got a little bit more than a week to go, right? Tune in tomorrow for... I don't know yet. That is a mystery that will be solved by future me. We're gonna see what happens because it's pissing rain outside and the roof is right there. So I'm not worried about leaks, I'm just worried about it being really f***ing loud. Let's take a look. I was learning about electronics and that is not what we're doing right now. And I mean, not to mention working in audio makes a lot less time. Makes a lot less time. Yeah, it definitely makes a lot less time. It makes no time.